How does that authoritarianism manifest itself in practical ways? Do you have any examples? I mean, is it about the parliament stacking courts with favourable judges? Is it about them amending the constitution? What is it specifically?
All of those are included. There's no separation of power in the sense that the judiciary is independent. The judiciary is, or the highest levels of the judiciary are packed by cronies and friends of the prime minister. The person who appoints judges in Hungary or decides on where trials will be held is a personal friend, family friend of the prime minister. The entire political apparatus, the police, the secret service, the head of the media authority are all cronies, and power is supported by a very small but powerful oligarchy of multi-billionaires who are the prime minister's friends and who finance his power. The mass media is owned by four families, all friends of the prime minister. So there's no mass media freedom. There's a little bit of tolerance for outspokenness, but it doesn't reach a lot of people. Of course, the public mass media doesn't carry any messages that are critical of the government. The National Wire Service is owned by friends or managed by friends of the prime minister. So there's a pretty tight control. It's very similar to Putin's Russia. The big difference is that Hungary is a member of the European Union, and the European Union should be speaking up or at least acting in reaction to this backsliding from democracy. But so far there hasn't been very much but a light slap on the wrist.
Why do you think the response is so tepid from the West? I mean, I was in Budapest earlier this year. It feels incredibly European, obviously. It doesn't, it feels like the sort of place that should be progressing towards becoming something more like an Austria or a Finland or something, and not something like, I mean, earlier this year, President Obama compared it to Azerbaijan in terms of listing countries where people feel that their civil liberties are under threat.
Well, you must realize that Hungary was, or Budapest at least, had the same kind of image or appearance even under the communist era. It was a very vibrant city. It was considered to be the happiest barrack in the Soviet bloc or the Soviet Empire. And right now, it is also a very lively city. There's lots of things happening. But the political system, the political regime, is very much authoritarian and doesn't allow for free competition, political competition of the type that we know in Western Europe. The reason why Europe is having a problem dealing with this is because the European Union doesn't have mechanisms of policing members who have already been admitted into the club. It's working on a mechanism, but it hasn't been put in place. That's one factor. The other factor is that this government has been reelected twice. Never mind that only 27% of the eligible voters voted for the current government, and the electoral system is such that by virtue of that 27%, the government enjoys 2/3 of the mandates in parliament. But it's very hard for Europe to step into the domestic politics of a country where a government has been elected by the people. So it's a difficult proposition. But something has to be done because obviously and very clearly, and it's documented, Hungary is no longer a country governed by the rule of law.
I mean, yes, and of course you don't want to go in and topple a democratically elected government.
No,
but
absolutely.
On the other hand, words have power. I understand that the United States government has been vocally critical of Hungary's government. Obama has banned 6 senior Hungarian officials from from entering the United States on suspicion of corruption. Has the American position maybe encouraged the protesters, or does that not make a difference?
I think the American position has played a positive influence, certainly with respect to Europe. I think the European decision makers have taken note of that as well. Certainly, it's big news in Hungary. One of the persons who's been banned from traveling to the United States is the head of the National Revenue Agency, which is absolutely astonishing. I mean, to have that level of corruption being identified. So these are very important signals to the opposition in Hungary, the democratic opposition, that is, that they are being listened to, or that they have friends outside of their boundaries, that they're not entirely on their own. But ultimately, it's up to the people of Hungary to decide what's going to happen in their country, and they'll have to become more active and more vocal in voicing their criticism of corruption and political and economic wrongdoing. This is a corrupt regime. Almost 500,000 people have left the country in the past 3 years. for Western Europe because they can't make ends meet. There is, according to the European Union's own investigation, which has just come out recently, Hungary is probably the most corrupt country right now in the European Union. This is a scandal.
Did the financial crisis and do Europe's ongoing economic stagnation play a role in precipitating any of this? Is there a glimmer of hope that maybe if the economy gets better and the global economy recovers, we might be able to reverse this?
Well, this is the big hope for the Prime Minister. I mean, for him, success means economic success. But the problem is that his economic policies are so, how should I say, based on voodoo economics, that they're not producing really good results, apart from the fact that they're hanging on to the deficit levels, and the growth rate is now, after 4 years, is starting to improve a little bit. But in terms of inequalities, in terms of the level of poverty in the country, in terms of increases of economic hardship, all of the data shows that the level of economic inequality is much higher right now than it was 4 years ago, and the living standards of people in the country have not improved. In fact, they have fallen. Standards have improved for a very small minority of people. These are the oligarchs, the people who are in support of the Prime Minister, and so whether there is going to be sustained economic performance that can pull him through, he hopes so. I doubt whether that's going to happen. Apart from everything else, so much of the national wealth is being stolen away through the tax system, through tax evasion, through cronyism, through the abuse of funds given to Hungary by the European Union. If the European Union hadn't given 35 billion euros to Hungary, the country would be bankrupt. It's basically European taxpayers' money that's holding up this regime.
What's your long-term prognosis? Are you optimistic? I mean, it's always easier to accrete power than it is to devolve power once it's in the hands of powerful people. What's the mechanism by which, over coming decades, Hungary hopefully unwinds the authoritarianism of the last 4 years?
Well, the real problem is that Hungary is in a bit of a Weimar state situation. The opposition is very weak, very disorganized, has been tainted with corruption itself. So the political parties that are in opposition are in no position right now to take over and manage the country's political and economic challenges. So that's one problem. The other problem is that there's a real role play confusion between the political parties and civil society. A lot of these demonstrations are organized by so-called non-governmental organizations or civil society groups that have a passionate hatred for political parties. But the fact of the matter is that democracies are only manageable through parties. They're not manageable through civic groups. So there is a real lacuna of political wisdom in this country, and I'm concerned about what might happen on the short run. On the long run, if the politicians learn their lesson, if people learn what is the role of political parties, and it's not to make nice speeches in the middle of Budapest, but to go down to the riding levels and organize through volunteers at grassroots level and build machineries that have the trust of the people, then Hungary might be able to make some progress. And if the civil society segments who are right now protesting and running around in Budapest recognize that political parties are the legitimate actors in a parliamentary democracy and not illegitimate players, then there might be some hope. There's a lot of work to be done.